Tomorrow night at the University of Winnipeg's Eckhardt-Gramatté Hall, the Virtuosi concert series will open their 2019-2020 season with the Montrose Piano Trio. Hailed for their consummate musicianship, impeccable sense of ensemble, and big sound, the Montrose Trio will be presenting a concert of Dvorak and Schubert, in a concert that is sure to be truly remarkable. Joining me here in the Classic 107 studios is pianist Jon Kimura Parker, violinist Martin Beaver, and cellist Clive Greenspan. Welcome to our Classic 107 studios.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. So, my first question is, when did you get in? How long have you been in Winnipeg?
We got in yesterday, sort of early afternoonish. This being the first concert of our season, and the fact that we're a bi-city trio, i.e. Jackie lives in Houston and Clive and I live in Los Angeles. We thought it was best to come here a little early and get some really quality rehearsal time done, and it's been really great, the rain notwithstanding.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, Jackie Parker here. I live in Houston, and I escaped another one of our epic floods. I left yesterday morning. My flight left at 7:30, and by 10 a.m. yesterday, our airport was closed for the rest of the day because we had so much flooding. So I was so relieved, and I get to Winnipeg and we rehearse, and then we're practically getting flooded here. I don't know what it is.
It poured early this morning, like about 7:30, 8 o'clock. It was just torrential rain. So I want to talk about the formation of the group. Martin and Clive, you were both longtime members of the world-renowned Tokyo String Quartet. How did the collaboration with Jon come to fruition? Do you want to talk about that?
Clive here. Well, Martin and I had been mulling over the thought of forming a piano trio within the last couple of seasons of the life of the Tokyo Quartet. And it became clear to us that our favorite pianist, and the pianist that we'd played with so many times, in fact, he was our last guest pianist with the Tokyo Quartet, was Jackie. And we dared to approach him in that final year, and he agreed. And then
Calgary, no.
That's right. It was on tour in Calgary. We hatched our plan and formed shortly thereafter, and had our debut performance was for the Chamber Music Society of Detroit. And that would have been in the fall of 2013.
I think so, yeah.
And Steve Woggerman, the director there, was very much behind the trio and was very generous in giving us that platform. And then we went from that to national tours, and we have we've had a tour in Italy, in Europe, and we'll be back there again next spring. So it's been now is our 6th year together.
Oh, wow. And I understand the name Montrose has a different meaning for each one of you. Maybe you can each describe the importance of Montrose.
Yes,
Martin?
Indeed. I was actually going to say that when we did have our first concert, until that very evening, it seemed like we were an unnamed trio. But we mulled over all sorts of names, philosophers, musicians, artists, painters, all, you name it. And actually, it was.
Your reason should be the punchline.
It should be. I'll hand you over to Jackie.
Yeah, because we started to, actually, I'm going to let Clive go first because it came from you first.
Did it really? Well, I do remember Jackie said, we've been through everything in the book, as Martin said, philosophers, painters, writers, dedicatees of fame. We famously rejected the Bartolozzi trio, which was, I'm shameful to admit, was my idea. The dedicatee of a couple of the late Haydn piano trios that we were playing in our first season. I thought when Jackie suggested Montrose, the first thing that came to my mind was a delicious Bordeaux wine, which has been consistently very highly rated, and I tasted it a few times and thought, well, it gets better with age. It's very high-end, collectible, and has great presence and a long aftertaste.
Nice.
And then for me, living in Houston, Montrose just speaks of the arts because our entire arts district in Houston and where all the art galleries and everything is actually called Montrose. So I just hear that name and I immediately think of the fine arts. But the kicker was Martin.
Yes, and although my first address in Winnipeg as a newborn was not far from here on Humboldt, I lived for a time on Montrose Street in River Heights. So it seemed very appropriate that there were three reasons for the name Montrose, and so we chose it.
Works out perfectly. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so Clive and Martin, you both played for a long time in the Tokyo Quartet. And one of the things I love about string quartets is the homogeneous sound that's created between the four players. It's like one instrument is being played by four different people, right?
Ideally so, yes.
So how is playing in a string quartet different than playing in a piano trio? Do you have to approach it differently as a string player?
Well, sort of immediately you have a very different approach to intonation because the piano is a very solid object in that particular sense. So
right, you can't really move.
If you're out of tune, or even if you should sound out of tune with the piano, then it's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like a quartet where the intonation is it's always up for discussion. And
I could lean to the left.
But sonically speaking as well, I mean, we do rely a great deal on the piano for the bass in both spellings actually, but more the bass BASE of the sound. Whereas in a quartet, I mean, you're very much responsible for that kind of thing. I'm not sure I'm explaining it very well.
Is it a question of like getting inside of the sound of the bass of the piano, much like you'd sort of blend down to the cello in a string quartet, or is that what you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say actually maybe Clive feels more differently than I would as first violin because I'm still sort of playing the high melodies as I would have done in the first violin role to a great extent. But maybe the role of the cello is a bit different.
Well, what happens with the earlier trios we played by Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, is that I'm often doubling the left hand of the piano. So actually, it's like having a support there, and the combined sounds of Jackie's left hand and my own line. I have to remember that I'm playing I'm sharing that space with a pianist and with a piano, which means that I have to be careful with the sound that I make. I have to, for example, vibrato and articulation.
Right.
And it makes me even more attenuated to the changes of harmony.
Yeah.
The other thing is that sometimes there is no bass line in the cello, and I'll join Martin in a more soloistic role, which means, therefore, that my own playing had to change more in a way than... I'm not sure if I'm also explaining it correctly, but the sheer volume of sound needed to be able to compete with piano and violin is different. I mean, the muscle tension required to keep up is greater.
Yeah.
So, and that's a very good thing, actually, because in the quartet it was a warm, sonorous sound that usually did the trick.
Right.
But not so much so in the piano trio.
And especially with early piano trios, I mean, so many of them, early piano trios, it's very piano heavy. It's almost like piano with violin and cello accompaniment.
Right. And I would say that there's definitely a little bit more. I mean, of course, we all have to be careful about balance, but there is more leeway in terms of even the violin and cello standing as, I wouldn't like to use the word solo, but kind of individual voices rather than that kind of homogeneous sound that you're talking about in the quartet, where that quest for a blend is really the big thing.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something,
No, I was just going to
Jackie,
say from a pianist's perspective that, and what Martin just said is, it happens in a trio that we could all be playing in a moment where we're trying to blend perfectly, but we could also be in a moment where it's like a triple concerto and we're all big soloists. I mean, and some repertoire requires that. Right.
So let's talk about the program. Two big staples of the chamber music literature, the Dvorak Dumki Trio and the Schubert E-flat. So it's sort of a concert of all killer, no filler, as it was. I mean, it's just a great concert. I want to first of all start with the Dvorak. So the title of the piano trio is the Dumki. What is the significance of the Dumki when it comes to this piano trio? As they pass the mic.
Well, what is the literal translation of Dumki or Dumka?
Well, Dumki is plural for Dumka, and the idea is that there's a plaintive character, there's a type of folk character to the music, and this trio, unlike a typical trio with four movements that are very carefully scripted to have an allegro and a scherzo and a slow movement and a finale, which the Schubert in fact has. The Dumki, which is plural of Dumka, is just a series of these. I mean, and one after another, and so the movements don't follow any of the normal kind of form that you would expect. It's a very episodic piece. And we were just discussing in rehearsal today, how do we make it clear that the piece is over? Because there are so many endings,
right,
and there are so many beautiful moments throughout. And rather suddenly it's over, even though it's a substantial work, filled with so much contrast, and suddenly it's over. And we were thinking, well, there is this glorious moment in the cello, and there are certain things that we can do to communicate that it's finished. But it's basically a series of these very plaintive songs with, of course, enough lighthearted virtuosic material in between to keep sort of a sense of variety throughout.
And even within the movements, there's changes of tempos. Like I think it's the second movement that starts out with a slow adagio, and then we get this sort of faster allegro section. So it's sort of this, I don't want to say schizophrenic, but there's, like you say, there's
no, sure. And actually
characters.
it's also common for audience members to mistake where the movements are actually divided, because there are, even within the movements, the episodic
I'm not even sure
occurrences.
where they're divided.
I once read a description of the Dumka as sort of being a nostalgic and elegiac song. But it's interesting that Dvorak, he felt the need to write his own Dumka melodies. I mean, he could have easily just have gone to, some from the Slavonic tradition, just sort of dug up some old Dumka melodies and, arranged it for the piano trio. Why do you think that was important for him? Do you know?
I think it's fairly standard. There are a lot of cases where composers will write in a very specific folk music style, and it might be a point of pride for them, or it might even be an interesting exercise to say, well, I'm actually going to base this piece on a certain type of music from my past, but I'd like to recreate it myself. I would think it's just a challenge for a composer, but it's certainly an option. I mean, there's no rule that says, well, if I'm going to write a Dumka, I should go back and use something traditional. So I think that's just Dvorak's choice.
Right. Okay, now the Schubert. Written 1827, I'm right in that. 1827 for me, bells and whistles go off, it's Beethoven, right? Beethoven dies in 1827. Is the E-flat trio inspired by Beethoven? Is there a Beethoven influence in that E-flat trio of Schubert?
Well, when you hear the piece right from the beginning, the opening statement sounds very Beethovenian. It's very forthright, this big declamatory statement in unison between the three instruments. Of course, he lionized Beethoven and was a pallbearer at his funeral.
Right.
But with Schubert, there's that. We were discussing this also in the rehearsal today about the construction of the piece and where you feel the climactic, thematic episodes will take place. It's an extraordinarily ambitious piece. Right. It was one of the few pieces that he actually heard and was performed during his lifetime. Right. And it's a piece that incorporates, obviously, the famous lieder that he found that he loved from a Swedish folk song. But it's a piece that he bears his soul. I mean, when you listen to Beethoven, you think, in a way, he's addressing mankind, whereas with Schubert, you feel like he's addressing you very personally. So it has all of those wonderful trademark moments where, in late Schubert, you have the feeling that, I mean, also to reference the fact that he knew that his time was up.
Right.
I mean, he wrote the piece, as you said, in the very last year of his life, and everything about the piece goes very close to disaster sometimes, and then finishes with a sense of optimism, sort of a fight against what was the inevitable. And of course, you can never get too far away from the lyricism in his music, which is, it permeates everything. If you don't get the leader, you don't quite know how to play the chamber music. And Martin and I were extremely lucky. We played the G major quartet many times, and Rosamunde, and Death and the Maiden, and the quintet. And we always like to think that everybody has their favorite, but you sort of die and go to heaven when you've played the Schubert cello quintet, the G major string quartet, and then we're so lucky now to have, we've done the B-flat trio, now comes the E-flat, which is a very different piece from the E-flat trio, the trio number 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. So that sort of leads to my next question. The Schubert Trio, it's so full of great melodies. It's written on a really grand scale. As you were saying earlier, it's ambitious. Is performing the trio just 50 minutes of good fun, or are there some moments in the ensemble that you have to be particularly switched on to? When you arrive at a specific place, are there moments where you're just sort of holding on by the seat of your pants?
I'd say that you're generally, at least personally speaking, you're on high alert through most of the through most of it. I mean, even in the relatively benign sounding. The minuet and trio, there's stuff that can trip you up. And, as you say, it's written on such a grand scale, and there are so many different versions of the same thematic material that you're called upon to play. That sometimes you really have to concentrate to keep it straight in your mind and to really kind of craft that huge arc.
And then there's also the concentration aspect of it, right? 50 minutes is a long time to be.
It is
in the zone.
And it's interesting because preparing this program, to think that or to feel that somehow the Dumke Trio is short. You think, oh yeah, okay, this isn't so bad.
Right.
My perspective on the piano part of actually a lot of Schubert chamber music, but very, very much so in this piece, is that in almost every case, the accompaniment material is much more difficult than the melodic material. And so I will actually really enjoy the melody when I have it, and I can, sing and relax and have a good time. But the accompaniments, and many of these are moments that I'm kind of hoping would not draw attention to themselves, to the audience, that they're simply there providing this blanket and cushion of sound underneath, are spectacularly awkward. So that's really the rub with this piece, is I can enjoy the tunes, but not so much when somebody else has the tune.
Right. I guess I'll wrap it up with this question. All three of you are renowned soloists in your own right. Jon, you're also on the piano faculty at Rice University. And Martin and Clive, you're on faculty at the Colburn School in Los Angeles. With your busy schedules, is scheduling rehearsals difficult? How does that process work? Do you try to schedule concerts when the school year is not so busy? How does that process?
Well, obviously there are periods when each of us, either individually or certainly collectively as academic faculty at schools, are busier. I mean, obviously there are some times around audition week or when we have end of year juries or something like that we simply say, unless this is a concert we really can't pass up, then could we please try to schedule it another time? But as we pointed out earlier, we came in yesterday. We came in Thursday for a Saturday concert. I mean, you do have to plan carefully, and we also plan our repertoire carefully so that it makes sense. But this is sort of this is a method that we learned with the Tokyo Quartet. In any case, because we were juggling so many different programs, and for instance, when there was an anniversary year like the Beethoven celebrations that are coming up.
250,
so it was always a big challenge, and we're not playing 100+ concerts like the Tokyo Quartet did. So in a way, it's not quite as challenging.
Right. Jon, Martin, and Clive, it has been such a real pleasure talking to you today. Thanks so much for stopping by our Classic 107 studios. It's just been terrific. Real pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
If you want to see these three fabulous musicians tomorrow night, you can phone the Virtuosi box office at 204-786-9000 to buy tickets, or you can get tickets at the door. The concert tomorrow night with the Montrose Piano Trio is sure to be absolutely spectacular. Once again, the concert tomorrow night is at 7:30 at the University of Winnipeg's Eckhardt-Gramatté Hall. Jon, Clive, and Martin, thanks again for stopping by.